Is this a better version of Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel ceiling? To refresh your memory, this is the original, the Last Judgment, which is part of the Sistine Chapel. This particular part was painted by Michelangelo in 6 years, between 1535 and 1541. And this image was created or generated by the Canva AI free image generator in about 30 seconds in February 2025. It was generated by me simply giving it the prompt, a better version of Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel ceiling. I'm not sure that it is better, but I'm going to be talking a lot about that word tonight, better. What does it mean to say that something is better? I'm also going to be talking about a number of other words that I think need to be used very precisely, or that I think we should reconsider how we use them. 15 years ago, I went to a talk by a philosopher. I can't remember his name. I can't remember what the talk was about. But I do remember him explaining why he read from his notes a lot, which you'll see me doing from time to time tonight. He explained that some workers use screwdrivers. Some workers use paintbrushes. Some workers drive trucks. Some workers use computers. Philosophers, he explained, use words. Their work is their words. So, he explained, he would read from his notes a lot because he wanted to get his words just right. I'll probably end up doing the same tonight, even though I'm not necessarily a philosopher. So who am I? Well, tonight is all about artificial intelligence and the relationship between artificial intelligence and human intelligence as discussed in a particularly important recent document from the Catholic Church. But before we get to that, how many of you have used ChatGPT? Okay, a few of you. For those of you who don't know, ChatGPT is one of the most famous chatbots, artificial intelligence, software programs that you can have a conversation with, that you can ask questions of, and receive responses in plain language. So, I asked ChatGPT, who is Matthew A. MacDonald in Ottawa? Please give me a short biography in 80 words. And it did a pretty good job. I guess I have enough of a footprint on the internet that it was able to find enough information to create a biography for me. ChatGPT wrote, Matthew A. MacDonald is a bilingual cinematographer based in Ottawa, Ontario. Originally from Halifax, Nova Scotia, he moved to Ottawa in 2008 to pursue a PhD in political science at Carleton University, which he completed in 2012. Transitioning to film, he has worked across various genres, including narrative features, documentaries, and television series. His clients include Paramount Pictures, National Geographic, CNN, CBC, and Gusto TV. Matthew is a member of IATSE Local 667, which for those of you who don't know is the International Cinematographers Guild, and an associate member of the Canadian Society of Cinematographers. So that's who I am, at least in part. Throughout my presentation this evening, I'm going to be showing video clips and images, and sometimes I'm going to be discussing those video clips and images, and sometimes I'm just going to be showing them to you to inspire your own thinking. This is one such image, which you'll see again at the end of my presentation. This is a portrait of François Mauriac and a quotation of his. If the flame inside you goes out, the souls that are next to you will die of cold. I like what Stephen Fry says. How many of you have heard of Stephen Fry, the actor? Although I suppose, given what I'm about to say, I probably shouldn't put him into a box. Stephen Fry says that humans can be verbs just as much as nouns. In fact, he says you can be imprisoned if you only think of yourself as a noun. I think that's true. Now, of course, humans are humans, which is to say, nouns. I don't think it's an either-or proposition. We are both who we are and, in another sense, what we do. Or, as the church puts it, we are created in the image of God, which establishes our true nature, and then called to ever greater union with God, which requires us to do something. Now, if you're an atheist or have a different spiritual understanding, don't worry. I'm not trying to convince you of anything. You can decide for yourself later if any of this resonates with you. I hope it will. So, let's begin. If you get nothing else out of my presentation tonight, it is my sincere hope that you leave with a sense of the importance of some of the questions I will be discussing. For example, what exactly is artificial intelligence? What is human intelligence? How are the two concepts related? What does it mean to say that something or someone is better? Remember the question from the beginning? What does it mean to say that something is better? For example, I hope you all agree that the image on the poster for this event is not a better version of the Sistine Chapel ceiling, although, as I mentioned, that's precisely what I asked the AI image generator I used to generate, and it generated an image. Presumably it thinks it's better. We use the word better a lot, and in a lot of different contexts. And part of what I'm going to discuss tonight is the importance of being clear about what we mean when we say something is better. How we answer these questions, in fact, even the way we talk about them and the words we use to try to answer them, will affect how we answer the most fundamental question I would like you to think about tonight. This is a question that is in fact answered, not just discussed, in Antiqua et Nova, a document released in January 2025 by the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith, a department of the Roman Curia in charge of the religious discipline of the Catholic Church, and the relatively new Dicastery for Culture and Education. But in this document, the Church invites everyone, not just Catholics, to think more deeply about this question and the implications of our answers, especially in light of rapid advances in so-called artificial intelligence. The question, of course, is, what does it mean to be human? There has been a flurry of philosophical commentary lately about the question of what it really means to be human. What is the relationship between this and sentience or consciousness, for example? Could machines one day be sentient? Are they already? Might that mean that they could somehow become human, or at least equal in some sense to humans? How about superior to humans? Better than humans? Some people argue that human nature is constantly evolving and changing. Consciousness is what they call an emergent property. Perhaps that means there is no such thing as human nature. Or perhaps it means that machines could one day become human, or even something greater than humans. Maybe we should just be replaced by machines. Would that be better? For example, would it make any difference right now if I said I was actually an AI-powered robot? Or how about this? Look around you at everyone here. Now ask yourself, would it make any difference to you if you suddenly knew that despite appearances, you were the only actual human person here? That everyone else here was actually an AI-powered robot? What if you were the only actual human person left on Earth, despite being surrounded by all these perfectly humanoid, perfectly biological, AI-powered robots, indistinguishable from you, an actual, biological, spiritual, human person? In fact, there are already biological robots created from frog stem cells. They're called xenobots. They were designed and built in 2020 by Douglas Blackiston and Sam Kriegman using blueprints generated by an AI program. They are synthetic, living, biological robots that, like other living organisms, can move autonomously, self-repair, and self-replicate through a process called kinetic replication. Here's a video where you can see them in action.
You're looking at the world's first living robots. That's right, these micro-machines are in fact brand new programmable life forms that researchers believe could help clean microplastics from our oceans or even repair organs inside our bodies. So what exactly are these little things? And should we expect to see them whizzing through our bloodstreams anytime soon? Measuring less than 1 millimeter wide, these xenobots, as they're formally known, were created by researchers from the University of Vermont and Tufts University. Using stem cells harvested from the embryos of the African clawed frog and a sophisticated computer algorithm, they generated a blueprint design that allowed the team to then build a new form of life that has never existed before. Stem cells were first differentiated into skin and heart cells. The skin cells were chosen for their capability to bond together to form the passive architecture of the xenobot, while heart cells were selected for their ability to contract and relax, with the goal of manufacturing a type of tiny engine that would propel the xenobots. After observing the natural dynamics between the skin and heart cells, the data was fed into an evolutionary algorithm run on a supercomputer. Based on this data, the algorithm was able to generate millions of different cell configurations to test for a desired outcome, in this case, locomotion. And so began the test for survival. Only the fittest configurations advanced to the next stage, where their designs were then crafted into better digital models. After about 100 test runs, only the very best configurations were left. Thanks to the power of their evolutionary algorithm, the team finally had a winning blueprint for their new life forms. All they had to do now was create them. Sound simple? Well, it wasn't. The team used tiny forceps in a microscope to painstakingly perform microsurgery on heart and skin cells to create their novel organisms. And voila, the researchers created their first xenobots. The biobots could propel themselves, moving in straight lines or in circles. They could work together, herding loose particles into tiny heaps. And when cut open, the xenobots healed themselves. Understanding exactly how cells do this is ultimately the goal behind this research. Cells are incredibly intelligent, and there are still so many things that we don't know about how they work. Like, how do they communicate to build complex bodies, or even heal? If we could decode those signals, scientists could build smarter robots with pre-programmed tasks that would be biodegradable and biocompatible. And these little xenobots are just the first step in figuring out how to control anatomy on demand. I mean, just imagine all the applications of this type of research. If scaled up, xenobots could be used for regenerative medicine like repairing organs or growing body parts for transplant from the ground up. They could be created using a patient's own cells, then inserted into their bloodstream and programmed to clear the plaque from clogged arteries or to detect cancer. But the applications aren't just limited to the medical field. The team also envisions assigning individual tasks to a swarm of xenobots to collect microplastics from the ocean or search and collect radioactive contaminants. Now, a world full of custom, planet-saving xenobots sounds really cool, but you may have already asked yourself about the ethical implications for creating a totally new form of life. And you're not alone. The team has fully acknowledged that future iterations of xenobots could include nervous systems, blood vessels, or even reproductive parts. And it's these additions that are prompting many to wonder if xenobots should be considered more than just machines. There's also the tiny fact that the research is partially sponsored by DARPA's Lifelong Learning Machines program, which again has left some observers questioning the future direction of this research. However, the research team is open and encouraging of these ethical discussions in the public domain, in the hope that policymakers can keep up and implement the right regulations as this science progresses. Right now, the xenobots are still really basic and currently restricted in their reproductive abilities. And in terms of scalability, as we've just learned, these bots aren't exactly easy to create, requiring hours of microsurgery just to create one. The next phase of the research is to develop a xenobot capable of carrying a payload using a patient's cells to deliver medications deep within the human body without eliciting an immune response. So ultimately, these xenobots are just the first steps in trying to understand how life starts, perhaps one day providing scientists with the ability to control exactly how life forms. For more robotic topics, check out this focal point on a robotics lab that's investigating the idea of artificial consciousness. Are there other exciting innovations that you'd like to see us cover? Let us know in the comments below. Make sure to subscribe to Seeker, and thanks for watching.
As you can see, they're microscopic. No chance you'd mistake one for a human. But have you heard of Aria? Anyone hear of Aria? No? Well, how many of you have been trying to buy more Canadian products lately? Okay. Well, this is a Canadian product you can buy right now for about $175,000. It's from a company called Realbotics. And yes, really, you can buy it right now. You can contact them at sales@realbotics.com or at this phone number. And as I mentioned, they are indeed a Canadian company. So if you're trying to support Canadian businesses, this is one way to do that, I suppose. Although I must say, I have some misgivings about their product. I'll let their marketing video do the talking.
Transcending the barrier between man and machine, Realbotics creates customizable, full-bodied, human-like robots with AI integration that improve the human experience through learning, connection, and play. Our mission is to create robots and AI that are indistinguishable from humans in appearance and social interaction. We're listed on 3 exchanges globally: the TSX Venture Exchange as XBOT, on the OTCQB markets as XBOTF, and the Frankfurt Stock Exchange as 76M0.F. Our Nevada-based manufacturing facilities produce the highest quality humanoid robots with the most realistic appearance on the market today. Integrated with our AI technology, our robots can display a wide range of emotions, such as empathy, kindness, and humor. With built-in memory capabilities, they recognize you and recall your previous interactions. They learn about their surroundings and about the humans they interact with. These human-like attributes facilitate and encourage genuine personal connections between robots and humans. Our patented modular robots are built to coexist with humans in various social environments and sectors. Realbotics can replicate a historical figure, a celebrity, or bring to life our client's vision for a robot. Our clients choose what robot they want and customize the details and aesthetics of the robot's appearance and personality. Contact us to learn more about creating your customized robot. Realbotics. Robots with a human touch.
Indistinguishable from humans? Maybe eventually. I don't think we're there yet. But actually human? Intelligent? I'm not so sure. Now, maybe you think this is awesome. Lots of people in the YouTube comments seem really excited about this product, for instance. The best. I want one of them. Take my damn money. I really want an AI robot. Okay, but others speak to more specific problems. For example, this will solve male loneliness. It's not just men. There are indeed a lot of lonely people out there. In fact, the idea that AI technology is a solution for humans who are lonely or who have difficulty relating to other humans or simply difficulty making friends is becoming more mainstream. And it is one of this company's core marketing messages. Lonely? Buy a robot. Now, I want to show you lots of examples of this technology in action tonight. So I asked ChatGPT about this. Again, probably the most famous AI chatbot. And I wanted to share the conversation with you. So I asked ChatGPT, is the idea that AI technology is a solution for humans who have difficulty relating to other humans, or simply for humans who feel lonely, becoming more mainstream? If so, why? Please answer in 20 words. Yes, it said, AI technology is becoming mainstream as a solution for loneliness, offering companionship and emotional support through conversational tools. But I wanted to know a little bit more about this. So I asked, in what ways is AI better at providing companionship and emotional support for humans than other humans? ChatGPT said, AI offers consistency, non-judgment, availability, and personalized responses anytime. And of course, these things are true. But I was curious, what kind of problems might an increased reliance by humans on AI for companionship cause? ChatGPT said, it could lead to social isolation, emotional dependency, and reduced empathy. Reduced empathy. Okay, ChatGPT, how could it lead to reduced empathy? Well, ChatGPT explained, reliance on AI for companionship might limit real-life social interactions, weakening the ability to understand and connect emotionally with others. This makes sense to me, but I was curious, where is ChatGPT getting these answers from? Are these answers based on your own thinking and lived experience, I asked? And here it gave an insightful answer that also explains a little bit about what's really happening when you're having a conversation with an AI chatbot. My answers are based on patterns in data and research, not personal experience or thinking. I draw on a wide range of knowledge to generate responses that align with human perspectives and current discussions. I said. If other AIs operate in similar ways, including the ones humans might use for companionship or emotional support, is there a risk that they will wrongly assume that they are truly bonding with another sentient life form and not simply an algorithm designed to give responses that align with human perspectives and current discussions? I think this is a very important question. And ChatGPT said, yes, there is a risk that individuals might perceive AI interactions as genuine bonding, mistaking them for real emotional connections. AI, while designed to simulate understanding, doesn't possess consciousness or emotions. Over time, humans might confuse its responses for empathy or companionship, potentially leading to emotional dependency or misplaced trust in the AI's responses. This disconnect between simulated interactions and true emotional depth could cause confusion and undermine genuine human relationships. I think this is very important to consider. Thank you, ChatGPT. I also want to point something out about how well ChatGPT was able to understand my question, even though it had a grammatical error in it. I said, If other AIs operate in similar ways, including the ones humans might use for companionship or emotional support, is there a risk that they will wrongly assume, and here the pronoun they refers to humans, not other AIs? Thankfully, ChatGPT understood from the context of my question that I was indeed referring to humans with the use of the pronoun they. This is just a little example of how ChatGPT is relatively advanced and is able to understand the context of your question, even if you don't get it exactly right. I think this is a good example of how this technology can be very useful. And it, of course, also highlights how this technology is being used or can be used to support people that have difficulty forming human relationships. And of course, as you saw from my conversation with ChatGPT, this may also present some challenges. But for some people, this technology isn't just a useful tool for humans to use or get emotional support. It could be the next phase in human evolution. For example, how many of you have heard of the father of artificial intelligence, Marvin Minsky? He was a pioneer in AI research and the founder, along with John McCarthy, of MIT's AI laboratory in 1958. Minsky described humans as, quote, essentially machines, and consciousness as, quote, just having certain kinds of short-term memory registers that describe a little bit about what you were recently thinking. Needless to say, he was an atheist. When I was 19, I read a book called Electronic Eros by Cynthia Springer that quoted Marvin Minsky, and I was frightened by what he was saying. Here was a prominent, influential professor at MIT and one of the world's leading AI researchers. And he was talking about machines literally taking over, as if this would be a wonderful thing, as if it was simply part of evolution. So I sent him an email to make sure I had understood him correctly. We ended up exchanging several messages, which thankfully I printed and saved. They're in my desk drawer at home. This is the first time I'm talking publicly about it, in fact. In our discussions, he confirmed that as far as he was concerned, humans are just machines, and that eventually, artificially intelligent machines would far surpass us in virtually everything, which would usher in some kind of transhumanist utopia. This is one of the more chilling things, he wrote to me. A few million years ago, we were not even so bright as the chimpanzees. Evolution hasn't stopped, although it will go faster in machines. Liking being human is a way of excusing our deficiencies. I couldn't understand why he thought this was a good thing. So I asked him about joy. I used the example of a child feeling a sense of joy while doing a cartwheel. I told him I doubted that a robot could ever experience joy like that. Genuine joy. And I told him that I thought human experiences like that have an intrinsic value. His response? That robots would eventually be able to do better cartwheels. There's that word again. Better. Better. What does it mean to say that something is better? Thinking that Minsky might be talking about trying to make humans better, through technology perhaps, I asked him what a better human would be. His response? Instead of better, let's say able to understand more things and acquire the knowledge about how to repair the things that we come to consider bad. As I said before, I don't consider evolution to have stopped. So human to me is little more than more intelligent and better dressed chimpanzee. Who can do it better? What does that really mean? Can a machine do this better than a human? Can a human do this better than a machine? A calculator can be better at computing complex mathematical questions than a lot of humans, but that's just a better tool, and sometimes it's not even a better tool. But in a general sense, could a machine ever be somehow absolutely better or more valuable than a human? Should we even try to make machines that are absolutely better than us, that might eventually replace us? Would that be a good thing, as Marvin Minsky thought? What good are we ultimately trying to achieve? These are not abstract academic questions. They are real, pressing questions with practical implications. For example, should some robots have rights like human rights? Should they have more rights than some humans? This is exactly what Eric Schweitzgebele, a professor of philosophy at the University of California, Riverside, argues. Now, I'm going to read a fair bit from an article that he wrote, but before I do, I want to draw your attention to the fact that he's not necessarily saying that we should try to do this, that we should try to create robots that are sentient, that are conscious, that can suffer. But he is making a logical, philosophical argument about the moral implications if we do that. He writes, if we someday create robots with human-like cognitive and emotional capacities, we owe them more moral consideration than we would normally owe to otherwise similar human beings. Here's why, he says. We will have been their creators and designers. We are thus directly responsible both for their existence and for their happy or unhappy state. If a robot needlessly suffers or fails to reach its developmental potential, it will be in substantial part because of our failure. A failure in our creation, design, or nurturance of it. Our moral relation to robots will more closely resemble the relation that parents have to their children, or that gods have to the beings they create, than the relationship between human strangers. Now, maybe creating something that can actually feel and experience pain does entail certain moral obligations on our part. But this also raises the question of whether or not we should even be attempting to do anything like this. And if we do, how could we ever know if a machine we create actually is conscious, actually does feel pain? This is, in fact, precisely what Professor Schweitzgebele thinks we need to consider very, very carefully. It is, in fact, exactly the question that Steven Spielberg raises in his film AI.
When's your birthday? I never had a birthday.
His name is David.
I feel it. That's creepy. Whoa, feels so real.
In a distant future, in an age of intelligent machines, he is the first robotic child programmed to love and coexist as a member of a family. His is a tale of humanity and a journey to find his place among humans and machines.
I'm a boy.
You are a real boy.
At least as real as I've ever made one.
These are the kinds of issues and questions Antiqua et Nova raises, all of which hang on the question of what it means to be human. Here's another example. AI can recreate your loved ones after they die. Is that good or bad? New technology can let us see and hear representations of those we've lost. Will it bring comfort or will it distort the grieving process? Well, I suppose that depends on what it means to be human and what it means to lose a human person who we love. The Christian tradition, and especially the rich intellectual tradition of the Catholic Church, has always had some pretty compelling, coherent answers to these questions about what it means to be human, of what it means to be a moral agent, which Antiqua et Nova finally applies to the question of so-called artificial intelligence. Reading it was like a breath of fresh air to me. I'm going to go through some of the main sections of the document now in a fair bit of detail, but it doesn't matter if you've read it or know anything about it, or even AI. Before I get into it, though, I mentioned the importance of words earlier. So I just wanted to say now that I don't think we should be referring to these technologies as artificial intelligence or AI at all. I think a more accurate term is anthropomorphic technology, although my friend Father Christopher McKelvey suggested anthropomimetic technology. I'll explain the difference later and why I think my friend is right, but either way, the new acronym would be AT. The reason for this is that I think the popularization of the term artificial intelligence or AI is part of an insidious discourse, meaning the way we discuss and relate to and come to understand something that is, in fact, doing a lot of damage to our understanding of what it means to be human. Antiqua et Nova echoes this concern. So, with all this in mind, let's get into the document. Antiqua et Nova begins by pointing out that the Christian tradition regards the gift of intelligence as an essential aspect of how humans are created in the image of God. So from the very beginning, it affirms and assumes a God who is real and who created humans in his image. But more than that, a God who created us to be in relationship with each other, to live in communion with each other, to love each other. I like to say that God is the place love comes from, although my friend Father Christopher says it's better just to say that God is love. Again, he's probably right. Now, you might be an atheist, so right away, you might dismiss everything this document says. Please don't. I'm not going to make any assumptions about the faith of anyone here, but I do think there is something profoundly valuable for everyone in this document, regardless of religion. I only hope that by the end of this, even if you still don't believe in God, you will see why the questions this document raises and some of the answers it provides are worth considering. First, the document talks about who humans are as nouns. Remember from the beginning, I talked about the quote from Stephen Fry and the idea that humans can sometimes be nouns and sometimes they can be verbs. Humans, the Church says, are composed of a physical body and something called a soul. Assuming none of you are robots, we humans, according to the Church, were created in the image of God for two purposes. One, to know God fully, which, especially if you're an atheist, could mean to know fully the ultimate creative and sustaining force behind everything. And second, to till and keep the earth, to be stewards of the earth, and to love each other as God created us. Our existence and our different abilities are gifts, and they are meant to be shared, to bring more of God's love and light into the world, helping each other know God better. Of course, humans have used their gifts to develop the technologies we know as AI, or, if you'll indulge me, AT. Like any other human invention, it is the result of our God-given gifts, these technologies. In other words, by itself, the document says, these technologies are neither good nor bad. It's how we use them and understand them that makes them good or bad. I would add that it is also how we talk about them, the discourse around it, as I mentioned before, which also determines to a great extent whether we are inclined to use them in good ways or bad ways, whether we use them in ways that help uplift others or hurt others, including ourselves, whether the way we talk about them affirms the inherent human dignity of everyone or leads to a dystopian world where humans have been reduced to the status of mere resources until they are eventually completely replaced by machines. Here, the Church's teaching about nuclear weapons, also a tool created by humans, might be important to consider. The Church teaches that while possessing nuclear weapons may be an effective military deterrent, and therefore justifiable to a very limited extent, the use of nuclear weapons is never morally justified, a position that has been affirmed by every single pope since 1963. Is AT the same as nuclear weapons? I don't think so, and the Church doesn't say it is. Are the risks as great? Potentially, the document implies, although it never mentions nuclear weapons specifically. That's me. The document begins with a discussion of how this technology grew out of efforts in the 1950s by an American computer scientist named John McCarthy, who you may remember founded the AI lab with Marvin Minsky at MIT. McCarthy had organized a summer workshop at Dartmouth University to explore the so-called problem of artificial intelligence, which he defined as that of having a machine behave in ways that would be called intelligent if a human were so behaving. While the definition of intelligence in AI research varies, the document says, most contemporary systems rely on statistical inference rather than logical deduction. What does that mean? It means they analyze large data sets to identify patterns, mimicking some cognitive processes typical of human problem solving. Remember earlier when I showed you the conversations that I had with ChatGPT, and it even explained a little bit about its process. This is why you can ask ChatGPT a question in plain English and get a decent, coherent answer in plain English in return. These systems can augment or even supersede what humans are able to do in many fields, particularly in specialized areas, such as data analysis, image recognition, and medical diagnosis. There are two types of application for these technologies that the document discusses. It calls the first narrow applications, which, for all intents and purposes, are virtually all of the applications you might have right now for this technology. This refers to specific tasks like image generation or enhancement or text-based research. For example, I fed the Topaz Labs AI-powered video enhancement application some archival video from this parish from the late 1980s, and it cleaned it up remarkably well. Although I think it looks a bit fake now. All it's doing is analyzing the video and recognizing patterns and filling in surrounding pixels in a way that it determines will make the image clearer. The second type of application is something called artificial general intelligence, or AGI. As far as we know, this doesn't exist yet, at least not quite. But it is a real theoretical possibility, and something many researchers in this field seem very excited about, and a number of them also concerned. In fact, uncontrolled AGI is the villain in the latest installment of the Mission Impossible movie franchise, Dead Reckoning. AGI, simply put, refers to technology that is able to interact and operate as any superintelligent and resourceful human or group of humans could. Imagine creating an autonomous, self-driven computer system with the capability of all the intelligence agencies and militaries in the world combined. Maybe throw in all the communications and social media companies as well. Imagine the progress. Imagine the potential. In the latest Mission Impossible movie, the main threat is, in fact, exactly this kind of AGI-driven technology gone rogue. In the movie, this rogue AGI has commandeered all the computers in the world and is thus able to manipulate the truth to the extent that no one knows what's real, not even whether or not their computer has actually been affected. In the opening scene of the movie, for example, the instruments on a Russian submarine trick the captain into launching a torpedo against what the crew thinks is an enemy submarine, when in fact they are alone, and they end up losing control of the torpedo, which ends up being redirected and killing all of them. But before Antiqua gets to a discussion of specific risks and potential benefits of this technology, it talks about the importance of the concept of intelligence. There is an implicit assumption that the term intelligence can be used in the same way to refer to both human intelligence and artificial intelligence, the Church says. Yet, the document reads, this does not capture the full scope of the concept. In the case of humans, intelligence is a faculty that pertains to the person in his or her entirety, whereas in the context of AI, intelligence is understood functionally, often with the presumption that the activities characteristic of the human mind can be broken down into digitized steps that machines can replicate. This is why having a clear and coherent understanding of what it means to be human is so important. In fact, as I used to tell my students when I taught political science, virtually all political disputes come down to a question of what it means to be human and what the good is. For example, according to the Church, humans are not reducible to their utility, to the functions they perform. Yet this functional perspective still informs most discussions of AT. Remember, anthropomorphic technology or anthropomimetic technology? Or, fine, AI. This functionalist perspective still informs most discussions of AI, which is exemplified by the Turing test. To pass the Turing test, a machine has to interact with a human, and the human has to think the machine is actually another human. In other words, all the human examiner is assessing is whether or not the machine is functioning the way a typical human might. As the document says, AI's advanced features give it sophisticated abilities to perform tasks, but not the ability to think. This distinction is crucially important. It says, as the way intelligence is defined inevitably shapes how we understand the relationship between human thought and this technology. In fact, it risks reducing our understanding of what it means to be a person to a functional explanation, as I just mentioned. As the document explains, this, quote, risks succumbing to a functionalist perspective, where people are valued based on the work they can perform. However, the Church affirms that a person's worth does not depend on possessing specific skills, cognitive and technological achievements, or individual success, but on the person's inherent dignity, grounded in being created in the image of God. I think it's possible to appreciate this even if you're an atheist. I want to focus on two things that are central to the Church's teaching about what it means to be a human person, which the document talks about: the intellect and the relationship between humans and work. As the document discusses, Thomas Aquinas says that human intelligence operates in two modes: the intellect and reason. The intellect is our innate capacity to grasp the truth, especially the truth of things that transcend the material world. In Catholic theology, the intellect is a property of the human soul, and although it is complemented by reason, the other mode in which intelligence operates, it does not require reason. In other words, it doesn't depend on a person having the capacity to reason, to analyze data, and make rational judgments. Now, I'm not a theologian, so I wanted to make absolutely certain I was putting this accurately. So, I asked my good friend, Father Christopher McKelvey, a biblical scholar and theologian currently working on his PhD, and I also asked, of course, ChatGPT. Here's what ChatGPT said. Yes, you are correct. According to Catholic teaching, the soul possesses an intellect that transcends material reality, and this intellect remains inherent to the person, even if their ability to reason is impaired due to injury or disability. The Church teaches that the soul's faculties, including intellect and will, are not dependent on the physical state of the body, but are spiritual and immortal. Even if a person loses the functional ability to reason, their soul retains its intellectual capacity, though it may not be able to actively exercise it in the earthly life due to the body's limitations. Now, there is a sense in which this response sounds like it's coming from another human, a very educated one. Of course, as I suggested earlier, I could be an AI-powered robot myself, and you might never know. So it's not a question of how perfect this technology becomes in mimicking human intelligence. It could, theoretically, do this completely perfectly one day. The question is, like the question about what it means to be human, how do we understand, relate to, and use this technology? And how does it affect the way we relate to others? My experience of asking my friend this exact same question, for example, first over text message and then in a wonderful phone call, was dramatically different and infinitely more fulfilling to me than asking ChatGPT the same question. The teaching is a little more nuanced than that, he responded by text, but basically yes. Intellect, memory, and will are the three faculties of a rational soul that make us in the image and likeness of God. He also went on to discuss angels, and finally, he said the only thing that diminishes our dignity is sin, because it harms the likeness of God in us. but the image can never be erased or reduced. Notice that he added a lot of insight based on his own human reflection that ChatGPT didn't, because it couldn't. I'm going to talk about what the gravest possible sin Antiqua et Nova says our misuse and misunderstanding of these technologies could lead us into is a bit later. For now, I want to highlight something my friend said after I asked him this question by text, which I could never get from any machine. Free for a quick chat? Just 5 minutes to hear each other's voices? We ended up talking for more than an hour. Which brings me to the question of how our collective understanding and use of this technology affects our relationships with other humans. Does it uphold human dignity and worth? Does it affirm the value of genuine human connection? Or does it reduce everyone, including ourselves, to an it? And as the document warns in the conclusion, does it risk making this human technology a new god or an idol? Again, I'll come back to that. In that hour-long conversation I had with Father Christopher, my friend, who is in Halifax, otherwise I'm sure he'd be here tonight, he pointed out that in Christian theology, part of being human is being the son or daughter of someone. Jesus, of course, repeatedly refers to himself as Son of God and Son of Man. This is important because it highlights something fundamental about the human condition, which the Church, like virtually all other religious traditions, consistently affirms. Humans were not made to be alone. We were made to love God and also each other. Even the ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle understood this when he said that humans are social animals, that we need each other, and that anyone who does not is either a beast or a god. If we're called to be like God and love each other, Father Christopher said, how different would it be if you found out that someone only did something for you for the sake of a utilitarian, selfish transaction, when you originally thought they did it for you out of love? For example, I asked him a theological question, not because I thought he would absolutely have the best answer in the world, but because I know he cares about these things. I figured he would have some insight, but most of all, because I love him and I miss him. He didn't answer me because I paid him. I'm pretty sure it was because he's my friend. I can't imagine a world where machines will replace that. I don't want to imagine such a world. Humans are made for each other. Sometimes that can be hard to manage. But I don't think the solution is to replace people with machines. Even machines that are outwardly indistinguishable from humans. Antiqua et Nova foresees this issue, especially when machines driven by these algorithms appear very human-like in their capacity to learn and adapt, for example. As the document puts it, although advanced AI systems can learn through processes such as machine learning, this sort of training is fundamentally different from the developmental growth of human intelligence, which is shaped by embodied experiences, including sensory input, emotional responses, social interactions, and the unique context of each moment. These elements shape and form individuals within their personal history. In contrast, AI, lacking a physical body, relies on computational reasoning and learning based on vast data sets that include recorded human experiences and knowledge. Of course, as we saw with the example of Aria, we can certainly give these computer programs physical bodies, but it doesn't change the fact that they are not human, and a robot is certainly not a person. In fact, I should stress that in Catholic theology, body and soul are co-equal. You can't have one without the other. Or perhaps more accurately, they are two sides of the same coin and can never be separated. Thus, the Church has a robust teaching about the body and the relationship between the body and human personhood. Pope John Paul II puts it succinctly in his Theology of the Body when he says, man becomes aware that he's a person through the body. And the body, of course, is created by God, not other humans. This painting by Anne Cameron Coutrie was inspired by Pope John Paul II's Theology of the Body. I suppose an analogy to humanoid robots could be that they come to see humans as gods, which I suspect could have two possible outcomes, both nightmarish, and one which Antiqua et Nova specifically warns against. First, the possibility that the success of these technologies deludes humans into thinking that they are actually gods. And two, the possibility that the robots will reject us as their gods and decide to destroy us if we don't destroy ourselves first. Loving and knowing each other is one of the fundamental ways that humans come to know God, which, you may recall, is the first of the two reasons the Church says humans were created in the image of God. The second reason, if you remember, is to till and keep the earth, which implies work. At this point, I'd like to shift from talking about humans as nouns to humans as verbs. What are we called to do as humans in our lives? And how does this relate to the questions raised by these technologies? In his papal encyclical, Laborum Exercens, about work, Pope John Paul II says that work is for man, not man for work. Not work in the sense of drudgery, but in the sense of using our gifts to help others, to make a contribution, to foster and cultivate that connection with other humans that sustains us and gives us a sense of something that transcends material reality, whether or not you call that God. Of course, this also implies the dignity of work and protecting the ability of a person to provide for themselves and their family through their work. But even in a world where all material needs are met, there is something inherently valuable in work. Again, not drudgery, but the kind of work we may feel called to, the kind of work we may have a gift in or a passion for. Now, if you hate your job, you might be thrilled if you didn't have to work anymore, as long as all your needs and wants are met. So what if a robot can replace you? You might not care, as long as you have everything else you want. This would presumably assume a completely different economic system. But what if you feel a calling? What if you have a sense that God has given you a passion and a gift for something, or a drive to master a particular skill, so that you can make a real substantive contribution to society, to help or inspire others, for example, or just connect with other human beings through your work? For example, my daughter loves to draw, and she's constantly honing her skills as an artist. Should I tell her to give up because all these AI software programs can do a better job? How would you feel if someone said, yeah, that's nice, but this machine can make better pictures. This machine communicates better. This machine is more fun to hang out with. This machine is less needy. This machine's songs are better. Better. This is one of the concerns Antiqua et Nova raises. I'm going to quote from the document here. While AI promises to boost productivity by taking over machine tasks, it states, it frequently forces workers to adapt to the speed and demands of machines rather than machines being designed to support those who work. In other words, it can invert John Paul II's axiom that work is made for humans and insist that humans must be fitted for the machines that are increasingly doing more of the actual work. As a result, the document continues, contrary to the advertised benefits of AI, current approaches to this technology can paradoxically de-skill workers, subject them to automated surveillance, and relegate them to rigid and repetitive tasks. Simply put, it robs them of the ability to use their gifts to help and connect with others in a real way. It can rob workers of the dignity of their work. This is especially true in creative industries and industries like software development, where creators and developers are increasingly being asked to use this technology instead of using their own problem-solving skills and creative intuition. But at the same time, the document points out that these technologies can help humans do better work, and in that sense, help humans realize their full potential to a greater extent than ever before. It could revolutionize medical research, for example, dramatically reducing the time and expense involved in scientific research or helping researchers process data substantially more efficiently. For example, the document highlights that AI could introduce important innovations in agriculture, education, and culture, an improved level of life for entire nations and peoples, and the growth of human fraternity and social friendship, and thus be, quote, used to promote integral human development. AI, the document says, could also help organizations identify those in need and counter discrimination and marginalization. These and other similar applications of this technology could contribute to human development and the common good, it says. But there is also a risk that it will create massive inequality. And the concentration of the power over mainstream AI applications in the hands of a few very powerful companies raises significant ethical concerns about how these companies may use and profit from this technology. Also, there is a risk of AI being used to promote what Pope Francis calls a technocratic paradigm, which perceives all the world's problems as solvable through technological means alone. In this paradigm, human dignity and fraternity are often set aside in the name of efficiency, as if reality, goodness, and truth automatically flow from technological and economic power as such. Yet, human dignity and the common good must never be violated for the sake of efficiency, the Church teaches. For technological developments that do not lead to an improvement in the quality of life of all humanity, but on the contrary, aggravate inequalities and conflicts, can never count as true progress. AI is currently eliminating the need for some jobs that were once performed by humans, the document points out. If AI is used to replace human workers rather than complement them, there is a substantial risk of disproportionate benefit for the few at the price of the impoverishment of the many. Additionally, it says, as AI becomes more powerful, there is an associated risk that human labor may lose its value in the economic realm. This is the logical consequence of the technocratic paradigm, a world of humanity enslaved to efficiency, where ultimately the cost of humanity must be cut. Yet, human lives are intrinsically valuable, independent of their economic output. Nevertheless, the current model, Pope Francis explains, does not appear to favor an investment in efforts to help the slow, the weak, or the less talented to find opportunities in life. The document also discusses a number of specific areas of promise and concern when it comes to this technology, including healthcare, education, misinformation and abuse, often known as deepfakes. Remember the example of the Mission Impossible movie I mentioned earlier? Privacy and surveillance, the environment, warfare, and finally, our relationship with God, which, as I mentioned earlier, includes our relationship with each other. In fact, there appears to be a new arms race emerging over these technologies, with China and the United States competing to have the most advanced systems. This is at least partly because of the huge potential for the weaponization of this technology, which Antiqua et Nova discusses. While AI's analytical abilities could help nations seek peace and ensure security, the document states, the weaponization of artificial intelligence can also be highly problematic. For example, it says the ability to conduct military operations through remote control systems has led to a lessened perception of the devastation caused by those weapons systems and the burden of responsibility for their use, resulting in an even more cold and detached approach to the immense tragedy of war. But it gets worse, potentially. Lethal autonomous weapons systems, the document explains, which are capable of identifying and striking targets without direct human intervention, are a cause for grave ethical concern because they lack the unique human capacity for moral judgment and ethical decision-making. For this reason, Pope Francis has urgently called for a reconsideration of the development of these weapons and a prohibition on their use, starting with an effective and concrete commitment to introduce ever greater and proper human control. No machine should ever choose to take the life of a human being. The document goes on saying that since it is a small step from machines that can kill autonomously with precision to those capable of large-scale destruction, some AI researchers have expressed concern that such technology poses an existential risk by having the potential to act in ways that could threaten the survival of entire regions or even of humanity itself. This is a video that explains a bit more about what these weapons systems are and why this is such an important issue which the church has raised.
Robots fighting wars. Science fiction? Not anymore. If machines, not humans, are making life and death decisions, how can wars be fought humanely and responsibly? Humanity is confronted with a grave future, the rise of autonomous weapons.
So autonomous weapons are those that select and attack targets without human intervention. So after the initial launch or activation, it's the weapon system itself that self-initiates the attack. It's not science fiction at all. In fact, it's already in use.
The world is in a new arms race. In just 12 countries, there are over 130 military systems that can autonomously track targets. Systems that are armed. They include air defense systems that fire when an incoming projectile is detected, loitering munitions which hover in the sky searching a specific area for pre-selected categories of targets, and sentry weapons at military borders which use cameras and thermal imaging to ID human targets. It's a pretty far cry from a soldier manning a checkpoint.
Militaries are not turning to robotics and increasingly autonomous robotics because they think they're cool. They're doing it for very good military reasons. They can take in greater amounts of information than a human could, make sense of it quicker than a human could, be deployed into areas that might not be possible for a human system or might be too risky, too costly.
In theory, any remote-controlled robotic weapon, in the air, on land, or at sea, could be adapted to strike autonomously. And even though humans do oversee the pull of the trigger now, that could change overnight. Because autonomous killing is not a technical issue. It's a legal and ethical one. We've been here before. At the beginning of the last century, tanks, air warfare, and long-range missiles felt like science fiction, but they became all too real. With their use came new challenges to applying the rules of war, which require warring parties to balance military necessity with the interests of humanity. These ideas are enshrined in international humanitarian law. In fact, it was the International Committee of the Red Cross that pushed for the creation and universal adoption of these rules, starting with the very first Geneva Convention in 1864. These rules have remained flexible enough to encompass new developments in weaponry, staying as relevant today as ever. But these laws were created by humans, for humans, to protect other humans. So can a machine follow the rules of war?
Well, that's really the wrong question, because humans apply the law and machines just carry out functions. So the key issue is really that humans must keep enough control to make the legal judgments.
Machines lack human cognition, judgment, and the ability to understand context.
And you can think of the parallels with how we deal with pets. The dog is an autonomous system. If the dog bites someone, we ask them who owns that dog, who takes responsibility for that dog. Did they train that dog to operate that way?
That's why the International Committee of the Red Cross advocates that governments come together and set limits on autonomy in weapons and ensure compliance with international humanitarian law. The good news is that the ICRC has done this work for over a century. They've navigated landmines and cluster munitions, chemical weapons, and nuclear bombs. And they know that without human control over life and death decisions, there will be grave consequences for civilians and combatants. That's a future no one wants to see.
Another issue the church identifies is the role of this technology in misinformation. And one of the most common forms this takes are what are called deepfakes, videos that look and sound real, but in fact misrepresent the truth. This is a news report from CBS in Texas that I found very interesting and disturbing that I thought I would show to you.
Hello, my name is Elon Musk. Today I would like to introduce you to quantum AI.
I saw it on Facebook, and then I saw it on TikTok.
Do you want to earn from $5,000 a month?
And then I thought, well, this might be a real thing.
Heidi Swan, a 62-year-old healthcare worker, thought she was making a smart investment because who better, she thought, to take financial advice from than one of the richest people in the world.
So did it look like Elon Musk?
Looked just like Elon Musk, sounded just like Elon Musk, and I thought it was him.
And so Swan contacted the company behind the pitch and opened an account for more than $10,000.
You thought you were investing in cryptocurrency.
Right.
But Swan had been scammed. Her money vanished, taken by a new wave of high-tech thieves who are using artificial intelligence to turn real videos into fakes and make fake videos look real.
Don't miss this incredible opportunity to change your life and help others in the process.
At the University of North Texas in Denton, Professor Christopher Murdo is also using artificial intelligence, but he's using it to create art.
AI, it's not going to replace the creative arts, but it's going to just augment them and change the way that we understand the things that we can do within the sphere of creativity.
Murdo sees this technology as a way to be innovative, but also sees its dangers.
A good sign as to whether there is free speech.
Murdo showed us how scammers can take a real video like this one of Elon Musk, then using AI tools, cut out his mouth and voice, and replace them with edited lip-syncing technology.
Today we are launching an investment project that is working right now if you see this video.
Murdo says advances in the technology are making it easier and easier to create a deepfake video. In fact, he says one can be made with just a single still image and by recording a video.
So we asked Professor Murdo if he could take this video and swap out my face and voice for that of Elon Musk's. And this is what he came up with. I could say, I know how to make you incredibly rich.
Or I guarantee you that the Dallas Cowboys will win the Super Bowl this year.
These AI-generated videos are hardly perfect, but they just need to be convincing enough to deceive an unsuspecting victim. It's cool technology, but that's scary at the same time when you think about what people can do with it.
Yeah. If you're really trying to scam people, I think you could do some pretty bad things with this.
According to a leading financial research group, AI-generated content contributed to more than $12 billion in fraud losses last year and could reach $40 billion in the U.S. by 2027. This year, both the FTC and the FBI issued warnings that deepfake scams are on the rise.
So once you realized that this was a scam, did you go back and watch any of these videos?
I did. I went back and watched them, but even though going back and watching them, they still look like Elon Musk. They still sound like Elon Musk. I didn't know it could be as real as that, and it is.
Finally, Antiqua et Nova discusses how our understanding and use of these technologies could affect our relationship with God, which, for the atheists here, could simply be a placeholder word for the ground of morality, or the ultimate source of being. Although, of course, the Church understands this in a specifically Christian Trinitarian sense. The biggest risk here, the Church says, is that creating machines and technologies that we might come to see as being equal to or even superior to humans in any sense, combined with the drift away from a connection with the transcendent that we see in society, some people may be tempted to turn to AI in search of meaning or fulfillment, longings that the Church says can only be truly satisfied in communion with God. Quoting from the document, "The presumption of substituting God for an artifact of human making," the document points out, "is idolatry, a practice Scripture explicitly warns against. Moreover, AI may prove even more seductive than traditional idols, for unlike idols that have mouths but do not speak, eyes but do not see, ears but do not hear, AI can speak, or at least gives the illusion of doing so. Yet it remains a machine, something humans have created. By turning to AI as a perceived other greater than itself, the document says, humanity risks creating a substitute for God. However, it is not AI that is ultimately deified and worshipped, but humanity itself, which in this way becomes enslaved to its own work. Ultimately, these are technologies with enormous potential, but also enormous risks. And the way we talk about and understand them is extremely important. I'd like to conclude by talking about art. The concluding section of Antiqua et Nova quotes Pope Francis, who says, "Only by adopting a spiritual way of viewing reality, only by recovering a wisdom of the heart, can we confront and interpret the newness of our time." This quotation is from his message for the 58th World Day of Social Communications on January 24th, 2024. In his message, he says the heart is ultimately the inward place of our encounter with God. To me, it sounds like he's talking about the human intellect, the capacity of the human soul to perceive truth that transcends material reality. Jacques Maritain was one of the most prominent and prolific Catholic philosophers of the 20th century. He gave a series of lectures in 1952 in which he discussed creative intuition in art and poetry. By poetry, he explained, he did not mean the particular art which consists in writing verses, but the intercommunication between the inner being of things and the inner being of the human self, which is a kind of divination. All art, he says, is the product of the artist's poetic intuition, which is a function of the human intellect, the faculty of the human soul that allows us to intuit, in a word, the hidden meaning and hidden beauty of things. When artists create, what they are really doing, Maritain argues, is intuiting the hidden meaning of things. They seek to transform the mundane and ugly into something inspiring or beautiful or meaningful based on their intuitive, artistic sense. They seek to render emotions and experiences in ways they hope will resonate with and transform others and open them to new ways of understanding. They are, as Maritain puts it, trying to surmount the distinction between aesthetic beauty and transcendental beauty, and to absorb aesthetic beauty in transcendental beauty. They are trying to touch something deep inside us that material reality alone cannot reach. Humans, confronting any work of art born of another human intellect, become aware of two things. Maritain says, first, the transcendental nature of all beauty, and second, the fact that no work of art can ever be perfect. This is because, for Maritain, art, for it to mean anything at all, must resonate with us, must transform us somehow. To do that, it must point to something beyond us and ultimately beyond itself, something transcendent, immaterial, and truly perfect. He quotes Charles Baudelaire, who writes, When an exquisite poem brings tears to the eyes, such tears are not the sign of an excess of joy. They are rather a witness to an irritated melancholy, an exigency of nerves, a nature exiled in the imperfect, which would possess immediately on this very earth a paradise revealed. Beauty and all art, according to this, is imperfect by definition. True perfection, by contrast, leaves nothing to be desired, he says, and therefore anything truly perfect on earth cannot move us in the way all truly human, imperfect art can. I think there is great wisdom and truth in the idea that art, properly understood, ought to leave us with an irritated sense of melancholy, no matter how outwardly joyous it may make us feel. This, of course, assumes that the goal of any artist is to share something of their poetic or creative intuition, their intellect, with others. This is the gift all artists try to hone, to express themselves and share something with their fellow humans that reaches beyond the material. If, however, art is reduced to a commodity, a product of primarily commercial value, and artistry is reduced to a technical question aiming at literal perfection, we have a serious problem, because we no longer have art at all. This, in fact, is what many proponents of generative AT technologies today are doing. As musician Nick Cave puts it, they are commodifying the human spirit. The goal of any AT image or video generator, for example, is not to apply the human intellect to discern what a given artist's poetic intuition is inspiring him or her to create, and how, but to simply respond as perfectly as possible to a linguistic technical prompt that describes in more or less technical detail what kind of image or video or sounds or combination of words, for that matter, to generate. The resulting product, while the result of a technical, descriptive prompt composed by a human, becomes the product of a machine attempting to perfectly execute the commands of a human, but without having any genuine embodied knowledge of what it actually is to be a human, to be an artist, let alone what it is to create from the heart. Such products are not the result of a human artist striving to intuit and reveal something true or beautiful that transcends the material. Often, they require very little effort, on the part of the human giving the instructions at least. For example, this image is the result of me simply instructing an image generator to generate a better version of Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel ceiling. The results may be technically adequate, maybe even impeccable, and they may inspire a certain kind of awe, although I wouldn't say anything like that about this particular travesty of an image. But there are images generated by AI image generators that can be quite impressive. But they are reduced to commodities and are no longer art, no matter how technically perfect, or perhaps even because they might be technically perfect. Certainly, they may resonate with some people on an emotional level, although people often remark on the cold or even soulless nature of a lot of images and videos generated this way. But they sever any relationship between the human artist and what are now simply consumers of a commodity, thus perverting the nature of art, what it means to be human, and the true value, meaning, and purpose of human connection in the process. A small number of companies stand to make trillions of dollars from these technologies, though, and all of humanity could certainly benefit from some of them. But it's absolutely important not to confuse what it means to be a human person and what it means to be a tool or a machine, which the Church, in Antiqua et Nova, argues is one of the biggest risks, not so much of these technologies themselves, but with the way we talk about and understand them. To call them artificial is redundant, since all technology is artificial. And to call them intelligent is to blur the distinction between human intelligence and the much more limited way in which these technologies mimic the ways humans behave, something Antiqua et Nova repeatedly warns us against. This is why I originally thought it would be better to refer to this technology as anthropomorphic technology, AT, in the sense of technology that we attribute human traits to, like emotions or intentions or certain ways of behaving. But then, my good friend Father Christopher McKelvey suggested anthropomimetic, which refers to a thing that simply mimics human behavior. I thought that sounded more accurate, but I wanted to be sure. So I asked ChatGPT. It agreed with my friend. It's more accurate to describe AI as anthropomimetic. AI mimics human traits or behavior without truly embodying them, unlike anthropomorphic, which implies the attribution of human qualities like emotions. AI simulates human actions or thought, but doesn't possess consciousness or emotional experiences like humans do. Of course, ChatGPT is simply scraping information that is created mostly by humans to find patterns and spit out answers like these. Who knows what it will be saying next year? In conclusion, I'd like to talk a little bit about the Holy Spirit before giving the final word to the document from the Church itself. Now, the Holy Spirit operates in all sorts of mysterious ways, and of course, if you're an atheist, maybe you don't even have a sense of the Holy Spirit. But indulge me, please. What I'm talking about are the things that we can't predict, the things that create beauty and meaning in our lives that we can't possibly compose a prompt for an AI app. I'd like to draw your attention to this portrait by Yusuf Karsh, very famous Ottawa photographer. This is a portrait of the Catholic poet François Mauriac. I think it's a beautiful portrait. It's a silhouette. But this is a portrait that Yusuf Karsh did not and could not have planned. Why do you think this portrait is a silhouette? Why do you think that it looks the way it does? Maybe it evokes a sense of calm contemplation or introspection. Maybe this is what Karsh was going for. It may be what he ultimately went for when he composed and took this portrait of François Mauriac, but it is not what he planned, and it is not something that he could have simply typed into an AI image generator. The reason that this portrait looks the way it looks is not because of pre-planning or some deep philosophical idea that Karsh had from the very beginning. In fact, Yusuf Karsh went to this man's apartment. He and his assistant carted a whole lot of lighting and camera equipment up several flights of stairs to get to the apartment. And then there was a power failure. The only light in the apartment that was usable for this portrait was the light coming through a window. And Karsh was not going to leave without taking a portrait. This is not the portrait he planned, but it is the portrait he got. Now, in my own life, I have had many experiences that I could not have planned and that have changed my life for the better. I have discovered books hidden in a long-forgotten back shelf of a used bookstore that have changed my life. I have found old cassette tapes and CDs with music no algorithm would likely ever have recommended to me that I fell in love with. I like to think that this is the Holy Spirit working in our lives. And it's the kind of thing that we deny ourselves if we reduce everything to a technological problem, to a prompt. I'd like to give the final word to the document Antiqua et Nova from the Catholic Church. Georges Bernanos warned that the danger is not in the multiplication of machines, but in the ever-increasing number of men accustomed from their childhood to desire only what machines can give. As the rapid pace of digitization risks a digital reductionism where non-quantifiable aspects of life are set aside and then forgotten or even deemed irrelevant, AI should be used only as a tool to complement human intelligence rather than replace its richness. Cultivating those aspects of human life that transcend computation is crucial for preserving an authentic humanity that seems to dwell in the midst of our technological culture, almost unnoticed, like a mist seeping gently beneath a closed door.